So once we are comfortable finding the slope from a graph, a table, a scenario, or two coordinates, then it's pretty easy for us to create our own linear function as long as we also are able to find our y-intercept. So I know our basic formula for a linear function in slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b, where m is our slope and b is our y-intercept. So I won't take a lot of time in this video finding the slope since we talked about finding slope in the last two videos. Our main focus is going to be on the y-intercept and then how we turn this information into a linear function, into an equation. So if we have a graph, we are going to find, first we're going to identify the y-intercept. So when I'm looking at my graph, I'm going to ask myself, okay, where does the line cross the y-axis? So if I'm looking at this line, I'm looking for the point at which it crosses the y-axis. So where that happens, that is my y-intercept. So that means that in this example, my y-intercept is 1. So in this case, b, which is my letter for my y-intercept, equals 1. Our second step is to find the slope of the graph. So if you need extra support with this, you'll see my other video for slope notes and finding slope in different scenarios. So this is our m. So what I'm going to do is look at my line and I'm going to follow my steps for finding the slope in a graph. So I need 2 points that fall directly on my grid lines. I need to draw a right triangle and I need to count the units. My slope here is 3/2, and I know that this is positive because my line is going up. So I have found m. m equals 3/2. Then I just need to plug these values in to the equation. So my general format for the equation is not going to change. We're thinking about our slope-intercept form. So we've got y equals mx plus b. The letters that need to be replaced with a number, so our variables that are changing, are m and b. And my final equation is going to be y equals whatever my slope is, which we said is 3/2 x. My y-intercept is a positive 1, so plus 1. So that is an equation from a graph. Pretty straightforward. We can look at the example here. So sorry again that my examples are kind of blurry, but just to practice writing an equation with one more example, we can look at this first graph. This is counting by ones. It actually already identified the points for us that we can use for our slope. But my first step is to identify the y-intercept. So I'm going to see, okay, where does this line cross the y-axis? It crosses at 0, 4. So that means that my y-intercept is positive 4. Then I'm going to find the slope of the graph. So I'm going to identify 2 points where I know exactly where they are located. I'm going to draw a right triangle. I'm going to count my vertical distance and my horizontal. And then I'm going to write it as a fraction as vertical over horizontal. My line goes upward, so we know it's a positive slope. I'm going to plug into that original equation. My original equation is y equals mx plus b. What I'm replacing in this equation is the m and the b. My M is a positive 1/4, and my B is plus 4. So we have now written another equation given a graph. Another thing that we can use in order to write an equation is a table. So my process, like I've said in other videos, is I like to have as few steps memorized as possible. So I try and turn everything to be in the same format. So if I'm given a table, what I want to do is just create a graph because I'm already comfortable writing an equation and given a graph. So why make it more complicated when I can just put these points on a graph to write the equation? So step 1 for writing an equation from a table is to graph the table as its coordinates. So what I'm going to do is I need to remember that when I'm given a table, I don't want to use that color, let's use purple. It's just giving me a list of coordinates. So this first coordinate is -2, 7. My next coordinate is -1, 4. My next coordinate is 0, 1. This next coordinate is 1, -2. And then my last coordinate is 2, -5. And then I can use a straight edge to connect my dots. If I don't have a straight edge, I can fold a piece of paper in half, and that'll give me a nice straight edge that I can also use on the EOG for next year, like that. So what we're going to do next, so we connected the dots and extended the line, and then I'm just going to follow my steps for writing a linear function given a graph. So my steps for that, my first step is to identify the y-intercept. So I'm looking at my y-axis. I'm seeing where the line crosses it. It crosses at 1. So my y-intercept, which we use the letter B for, is just a positive 1. My second step is to find the slope of the graph. So what I'm going to do, which is super easy since we plotted coordinates from the table, is I'm going to pick 2 coordinates. I'm going to draw my right triangle. I'm going to count our vertical height and our horizontal height. And then I need to remember to think about, okay, is my line negative or positive? In this case, if I were to write my name would go downward. So this is a negative slope, and we do vertical over horizontal. So -3 over 1. And then my last step is to plug in these values into the equation for M and B. My equation is y equals mx plus b. The numbers are going to replace m and b. The x is going to stay and the y is going to stay. M becomes -3 over 1, or just -3, and B is 1. And we've got an equation given a table. Next, we are going to look at examples when we're given 2 coordinates or when we're given 1 coordinate in this slope. So I combined them into this one problem. I probably could have made it 2 separate squares, but we're just going to make do with this. So if they give us 2 coordinates, we can just pretend like it's a table, right? So I know if I'm given 2 coordinates, I can plot these 2 coordinates on a graph and create a line. So that's what our first step is. Put them on a graph, so the 2 coordinates, or if they give you the 1 coordinate in the slope, you put the 1 coordinate down and use the slope to continue your line. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So this first step is to put them on the graph. So my first example is a coordinate in the slope, and the second example is 2 coordinates. So let's look at the 2 coordinates first. So this first example we're looking at, example number 2, we've got the coordinate -3, 0, and we've got the coordinate 3, 2. And then what I'm going to do is connect these dots and extend my line. I need to use a straight edge because I'm going to be looking for my y-intercept. And if my edge isn't straight, I could mess that up. So I plotted my 2 points. I'm ready to connect the dots, extend the line, did that, step number 2. And then I'm just going to follow my steps for writing a linear function from a graph. So just like before, we're just following those same steps to try and make our life a little easier. So my first step is to identify the y-intercept. The y-intercept for this equation is also just 1. That has been our y-intercept for a lot of them. So b equals positive 1. My second step is to find the slope. The slope of this graph is positive 1/3 because we do our vertical change over our horizontal. So our equation for this graph, I know I'm going kind of quick, but we've seen this type before, right? Is just y equals 1/3 x plus 1. So pretty straightforward. It's going to be the exact same thing if we are given the slope and 1 coordinate, because all we're going to do in that case is follow these exact same steps. The only difference is how we start off making the graph. So how we're going to start off making this graph is we are given the coordinate 0, 2. I'm going to plot that coordinate, and then I'm going to use my slope to continue my line. So if my slope, so this is a little bit new, is negative 1/2, then I know my vertical change is down 1 and my horizontal change is right 2. So if I want to continue my line, and actually our next video is going to go more in depth in how to use a slope to create a line. So if this is confusing, don't worry too much about it because it'll be covered in the next video. So my y-intercept in this case is 2. And my slope, which was given to me, is negative 1/2. So my graph, the equation for my graph is, y equals negative 1/2 x plus 2. So what you can notice by looking at this is they actually gave me the y-intercept. That's the coordinate they gave me. So I didn't even have to create a graph because I was given the 2 pieces of information that I needed.